Welcome into Texans on Tap. I'm Brandon Strange with Charlie Palillo and Josh Jordan from SportsMap. You can read their work on sportsmap.com and follow them on X at Palillo and at Josh Jordan 975. Texans, who have dropped 3 of their last 4 games, head to Arlington to face a Cowboys team on tilt, losers of their last 4 in a row. We're here to preview it with you. Just a reminder to hit like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, click the bell for notifications so you know when new content drops, like when we're live after every game this season. If you're on the go, we're on all your favorite podcast apps. Just search Texans on Tap. We should probably start with Houston's offense, guys, because it seems to be where all of the darts are being thrown, all of the microscopes are pointed. We're about to get a deep blue steel alert on our phones for the 2023 Offensive Rookie of the Year. The run game was completely shut down last week. We hope that a healthy Nico Collins can take the field this week. As we heard, it's trending well. So all of those question marks in place, how much do the Texans' chances hinge on a healthy and productive Nico Collins?
I picked up on you tactically here, Brandon. We're doing the Texans offense in the first half of the podcast. So we're witty, insightful, in rhythm, generally competent. If we waited until the second half of the podcast, we'd be babbling idiots. Okay, maybe bigger babbling idiots. If you mean for this game, Nico Collins obviously enhances the offense, but the Texans offense should at least be decent for 2 halves, maybe, against the Cowboys defense, which, like the entire Cowboys team, is just in tatters. Right? DeMarcus Lawrence, their best defensive lineman, been out. Duron Bland, who was Mr. Pick Six last season, he's been out the bulk of the season. They also look to have opened a can of quit in the game against the Eagles. They're 3-6, so they're not mathematically out of it. In fact, each of the last 5 seasons, the team that was 3-6 wound up making the playoffs. I'm pretty sure the Cowboys won't be that team this season. So the Texans measuring stick needs to be itself, Nico or no Nico. I mean, they haven't been a joke in the first half of games, but they damn sure have for over a month now in the second half of the games. The pressure should increasingly mount on Bobby Slowick. I don't mean toward an in-season change. I know some teams are making in-season coordinator changes. I don't feel it with the Texans. Who would you name? Bill Lazor? Look at his track record as an NFL offensive coordinator. Gerard Johnson, who's never been a play caller. So I think they're riding it out with Slowick. And again, they haven't just been a carnival of clowns game in, game out. It's been the second half for the last month. And so I don't see why Nico would specifically improve the second half offense relative to the overall offense. But since they've scored only more than 24 points twice in 10 games this season, and one of those was with Nico Collins, welcome back, big fella. And he gives him the weapon that if Stroud is running around because of the crappy pass protection, Nico can be that bailout guy. Let your best weapon make a play, 50-50 balls, in traffic, challenged. And they have lacked that without Nico Collins.
For me, Charlie went into it. We've gone over it first half, second half. The other thing that we need to hit right here is at home versus on the road. It's been a huge difference for CJ in particular in the offense. CJ Stroud has only thrown for more than for more than 234 yards on the road this season. So 234 was the most. That was week 1 against the Colts when you had all your weapons ready to go. He's only thrown for more than 200 yards in 2 games. And that was that Colts game and the Vikings game. And we look at that Vikings game, it was a blowout. Those were garbage time yards. So there's really not much going on as far as being effective on the road in the passing game. CJ has 0 touchdowns in his last 2 road games. This is a huge problem for these guys. They had 82 total yards in the second half against the Lions last week. That was at home, but still terrible. 4 straight games under 24 points. This offense, it's a big problem right here. And I think one of the other things I want to hit on is Joe Mixon. I think he struggled to run the ball last week. That was the first game he finished that he didn't rush for 100 yards all season long. And it was a big problem for them. So I'd like to see them kind of do what the Chiefs do when they're seeing trouble like that. Last week, Kareem Hunt couldn't get anything going against the Broncos. The Chiefs were struggling to run the ball. So what does Andy Reid do? He dials up 10 targets to Kareem Hunt, his running back. He ends up with 7 catches for 65 yards. Last week, Joe Mixon got off to a great start in the first half, caught 2 passes for almost 50 yards, 44 yards in the first half. And they didn't catch another pass for the rest of the game. He should have been at 9 or 10 targets instead of 4. So once again, we're kind of pointing at Bobby Slowick. Get the ball to Joe Mixon. If the run game is not working, go to the short passing game. And that's something that can work for you, especially when you don't have Nico, when you don't have Steph. And then finally, to give a little bit of easy on CJ, it's got to be tough for him. He spent a lot of the offseason getting chemistry, with his new receiver and Stephon Diggs. That was going to be the big plan, him and Nico and Tank. And then you take away Nico. He's been out for 5 games now. Now you don't have Steph. CJ's having to throw to Mechie and Hutchinson and guys he probably didn't throw to nearly as much as he prepared for this season because he wasn't having to expect to use them this much. So hopefully as the season goes along, he gets a little more comfortable throwing to these guys. And of course, Nico coming back would be a huge boost to the offense.
Yeah, 2 things about what you can try to do some in the passing game. You alluded, Josh, to Andy Reid, who is probably the most famous, best screen pass attack coach ever in the NFL. The Texans screen game, basically somewhere from non-existent to El Stinko. If they don't lead the league in hitch passes to wide receivers that lose yards, it was a guy named Greg Davis, who was the offensive coordinator at Texas, and Longhorn fans got so sick of him that seemingly the most predominant play on their offense was the quick hitch to a wide receiver for a loss of 2, or maybe they'd break it for a gain of 2. And this isn't even Slowick and Texans specific. Why don't you, when you have talent, right? And the Texans have so-called skill position talent. They have the all-around package in Nico Collins. You have the pure burner in Dell. John Mechie off the best half of his career last week. Why don't you just mimic the exact play? You go watch it on video, the exact play, the exact spacing, the exact execution. Okay, that comes down to what you do on the field. But, because the Chiefs, they don't have this core of awesome wide receivers. They don't have an elite running back. Travis Kelce the last several years, Hall of Fame level tight end. But you look at their weaponry in the passing game and it's, they just overwhelm teams with talent. Scheme is a part of it. And the Texan scheme in the second half has appeared non-existent for a while now.
Let's talk about that second half slump, because when D'Amico was asked about second half adjustments, he was pretty dismissive of it. He said the coaches make adjustments all game, not just by halves. Charlie, we were talking about this offline about how you were surprised to see fans already coming after D'Amico on X and in our YouTube comment section. I saw a lot of negative feedback regarding that response. What do you think about that response?
Well, I mean, it's natural. And when the team gets off to a 5-1 start and we're approaching the point on the calendar, what is it? Visions of sugar plums start dancing in heads. Visions of a real run at a Super Bowl or an AFC champion. No, the Texans at this snapshot in time look like an absolute pseudo contender. Right? The Buffalo home win was a really good one, but overall against good teams, right? You look at the other Texans victories. Who have they beaten that's anybody good? The Colts twice, the Bears, the Jaguars, the Patriots. So fans naturally overreact. In good times, the greatest ever. In rough times, the worst ever. Slowick has to be coaching for his job, though. And in terms of halftime adjustments, I buy in what D'Amico's saying there. Right, halftime is 12 minutes. The first 90 seconds of it's getting off the field. The last 90 seconds of it is getting on the field. And with the tablets and everything on the sidelines, the instant images and looking at video, you can't reinvent your wheel at halftime. But to me, that compounds why are the Texans a freaking train wreck offensively in the second half? Because just as, Slowick doesn't have time to overhaul what he's trying to do offensively, or that was our first half game plan. Now let's watch what we're going to do in the second. The opponent can't reinvent its defense in the second half and say, okay, now we're going to flip our script and completely shut down the Texans offense by doing so in the second half. It's just been a comedy of errors and lousy play. And as we talked about recently in an Astro Stone Cold Stros, if you have coaches, they have to be held accountable to some extent. Well, in football, it's much more so reality than in baseball, because play calling is essential. Scheme is essential. Baseball boils down to individual matchups of pitcher versus hitter. So Bobby Slowick has gone from hot ticket rising head coaching candidate to what the hell are you doing in the second half? And, I don't know that it was necessarily of a harbinger of D'Amico's thinking on how this season plays out, impacts who his offensive coordinator is next year. But he essentially called out Slowick and also a little bit called out CJ Stroud. We can't throw a pick the first half of the first play of the second half. We can't give away the ball when, you have a receiver open for a touchdown. So these are the first real stormy seas that D'Amico's had as a head coach. I still think it's part of his growth curve, the team's growth curve, but maybe a little too much was expected too fast. And then when you throw in Nico Collins down for a while, Will Anderson in and out. The Texans are a nice team. They're not an elite team.
Well, especially now with Diggs out for the year and Nico has missed 5 games. But I think as far as D'Amico Ryans, he's protecting his players and he's protecting his coaches when he's answering these questions. I mean, did you see him when he was asked about why did Titus Howard try and strip the ball from CJ Stroud and looked like he was trying to take off and run with it? He came out and was like, oh, he wasn't trying to take the ball. He was just trying to protect CJ and keep him upright. And I mean, anybody that has eyes saw what Titus Howard was trying to do there. But D'Amico's not going to come out and throw him under the bus, which, you want that in a head coach, but also you want them to hold people accountable, with Bobby Slowick. And Slowick is getting killed, but to be fair, I mean, he did dial up that touchdown to Tank Dell, and CJ threw the ball late and put too much air under it. If that touchdown happens, then you feel a lot better about what the offense looks like and the outcome of the game. It's all these things. It's CJ making some poor decisions. It's Howard giving up early on blocks. It's Shaq Mason, giving up a pressure at the wrong time. It's going to happen. Scruggs with a holding penalty. All these things work together, and it comes out to be a big problem. It's just, I didn't think we expected the defense to be so much better than the offense this year, but that's just been the case. A decent offensive performance last week gets you a win over the Lions. The defense has been spectacular. We'll see if they can do it again this week. So I don't blame D'Amico for that, but like at the end of the game, there were some stuff where you're like, why did you go for that 58-yard field goal? Even if you make it, there was like a minute 56 left in the game for the Lions to go either match with their own field goal or to go win the game. So it was kind of one of those things where did D'Amico just not trust his offense anymore at that point? Like, oh man, CJ's either getting sacked or turning it over. I'd rather take my shot on kicking the field goal and trust my defense to hold them. Maybe that's the way he was feeling at the end of that game. But it just feels like they're so conservative. It doesn't seem like they're playing to win that often. Try to score points. They're settling on field goals, I think, way too often. You can't count on Kami Fairbairn to save you every week.
I don't have the data on this, but is there another team in the league that's gone 4 consecutive second halves without scoring 1 touchdown, be it garbage time, a fluke play? And the Texans, the schedule, it hasn't been the 2000 Ravens, the 85 Bears, the 2002 Buccaneers. They haven't been facing these juggernaut defenses. They have just been pitiful. And the saying is you can't fire all the players. And again, I'm not calling it all for an in-season offensive coordinator change. But if Slowick is not coaching for his job over the rest of this season, 2 things. 1, CJ Stroud has to be a real big backer of his behind the scenes. Or 2, just name Slowick Supreme Court Justice and let him have the job for life.
Well, speaking of dysfunctional offenses, let's go on the other side of the ball and talk about the Cowboys, who are averaging less than 20 points per game this season and now have Cooper Rush taking snaps under center. His start against the Eagles was nightmarish. How do you like Houston's chances of keeping Dallas's offense quiet in this one?
Well, Jerry Jones says we're sticking with Cooper Rush because he gives us the best chance to win. Well, best chance, actually better, it's a comparative. It was to Trey Lance, who came in and looked over his head, as he has since being overdrafted by the 49ers. The Cowboys are clinging to the fact, well, we're 3-6. There are 3 wild cards. The third wild card's only 2 games ahead of us. Our schedule's kind of soft, but you have to win some games. Jerry, of course, lives in denial. He said the Cowboys were all in the offseason. They were 12-5 each of the last 3 years, and they've been hammered by injuries also. Dak Prescott wasn't playing particularly well before he went down, but that's a devastating blow. But we covered the defensive side. Brandon Cooks, I don't think he's asked to be traded yet. He also hasn't played since late September. But bringing back Ezekiel Elliott, I mean, come on, he was washed up 2 years ago. So Tony Dowdle now is their heavy-duty back. Their receiving core, apart from CeeDee Lamb, is a cast of who's he and you have to be kidding me's. They've just fallen apart. They still have personnel on the offensive line that you would think, well, that should still be pretty good. 3 first-round draft picks there. Zach Martin, probable Hall of Famer. But sometimes when it goes bad all the way. And that's the story of the 2024 Cowboys. But they should, if they signed Trey Lance basically off the scrap heap when the Niners were all Brock Purdy. And okay, we admit it, we blew the pick. Why would you not play him to make a call, whether he is Dak's quarterback caddy going forward, right? Cooper Rush is 30. What's the upside with him? Well, Jerry's thinking they can win this game and still make a run at the playoffs.
We'll see about that. It makes me wonder, like, to Charlie's point, why not play Trey Lance? They've announced that it's going to be Rush. I wonder if they're trying to kind of confuse the Texans here, like, oh, let's make them prepare for Rush, and then we're gonna surprise them. But they're not going to surprise D'Amico. He knows that that's a possibility. And what I do like is that they've had to deal with the Colts with, is it going to be Flacco or Anthony Richardson? So I think the Texans are prepared for, if we're going to get a guy that's going to run a little bit more, or if we're going to get a guy that's going to be thrown from the pocket more, I think they'll be able to make that adjustment. And I just think they're so much more talented, the Texans on defense, than the Cowboys are on offense. I'm not too worried. CeeDee Lamb's the one guy that you really have to worry about. He's a great player, but he struggled the last couple of weeks, dealing with a shoulder injury from a couple of weeks ago that he's just been kind of pushing through. So he's banged up also. So I don't see a lot happening for the Cowboys on offense in this game. I think on defense is where it could get really tricky, because with Micah Parsons, and we know the relationship CJ Stroud and Parsons had, they do all these podcasts together. They were doing all kinds of stuff together in the offseason. Parsons is finally back, had a couple sacks last week. He could really cause some trouble here because they move him all around. He can stand up and rush. He can put his hand in the dirt. If you just have him just send him at your guards and cause confusion, that could be a big problem in this game. So that's where I really worry, is if some turnovers start happening and it starts to unravel. That's where I have a little bit of concern. The Cowboys defense might be able to do something, but the numbers don't look good for them. I mean, they've been bad overall this year. I mean, they're giving up 4.7 yards per carry to running backs, which is 24th in the league. So Joe Mixon should be able to get going. Overall on offense for the Cowboys, they're averaging under 20 points a game, and that was with most of those games having Dak Prescott. So overall, I think this is a pretty good matchup for the Texans.
Something's got to give. Now, the statistics obviously are bent by Micah Parsons having missed a bunch of games and a couple of other injuries. But Parsons, right, he's probably a top 5 defensive player in the NFL. But while the Texans have been just inept in the second half, getting to the red zone's been a challenge, much less getting there and scoring. Cowboys' red zone defense has been a joke, worst in the NFL. Teams reach the 20-yard line, they score touchdowns 77% of the time. That is 32nd out of 32 teams. Texans' red zone defense also stinks, by the way, this season. They're 29th. But Cowboys dead last. Will the Texans get there to score a couple of touchdowns, one after halftime maybe, possibly, and not make this just a field goal game between two guys who can really boom it? Fairbairn, we know for the Texans. I mean, Brandon Aubrey, he is Superfoot for the Cowboys.
All right. Before we get to predictions, I want to get your final X factors for Monday night's game. We are also interested in hearing everyone's X factors, so make sure you tell us in the comments and what you're watching for. Charlie, what's your final X factor or wild card or wild cards you'll be watching for during Texans Cowboys?
Not so much that it swings the outcome of the game, but I'm curious about the crowd dynamic. Cowboy fans are fed up. Texans fans are frustrated. The Cowboys' home field advantage typically isn't all that great because the stadium is so large. A good number of visiting fans make the trip to check out Jerry's World and so forth. And obviously, there's going to be a convoy up I-45 of Texans fans. So, it's not like it's 90,000 Cowboy fans just making it impossible. They were undefeated at home last season, well, until the playoffs. This year, the Cowboys are winless at home. Josh covered the Texans' struggles on the road, so it's the movable object against the very resistible force. And particularly if the Texans can start early, do the Cowboys show that pack it in component? So there will be my X Factor wild card.
Yeah, I like the fact that Mario Edwards is returning from his suspension this week at D tackle for the Texans. We saw Foley Fatukasi banged up last week, so it'd be nice to get some new blood in there. The other thing, and we're not going to know till the end of the week, what happens with Will Anderson Jr. He missed the past game. Is he going to be able to return for this one? And my other kind of big X factor is, man, this would, for the Cowboys to steal this game in a season where theirs is pretty much over and the Texans actually have something to play for. They're leading their division. I'm interested to see, did the Texans get up for this one? Because I mentioned it earlier, they don't play well on the road, but a lot of teams, they play well, not just this year, almost every year at Jerry World. It's not much of a home field advantage for the Cowboys, and especially on the big stage. Visiting players love to come and make a name for themselves in that stadium on national television. So I'd like to see, this could, spin the Texans into a great win streak here, especially with the schedule. So if they can get some good momentum, CJ gets rolling, Nico comes back, Tank's rolling, Joe Mixon, the whole year, the offense hasn't really fired on all cylinders. I think this could finally be the week to see that happen. And then maybe that propels the Texans to a really nice run to close out the season.
Charlie, you touched on this. I think my X factor is going to be the kickers. Brandon Aubrey has only missed 2 field goals all year, 22 of 24. Kaimi Fairbairn has missed 5 of his 29 attempts, 3 over his last 2 games. So I'll have my eye on that matchup and whether Kaimi Fairbairn can settle back into that consistent success that we're used to him achieving on the field. And as we record this, the Texans are 7 to 7.5 point favorites, depending on which book you're looking at, with the total just at 42.5. If you're watching this on YouTube, give us your score predictions in the comments. Charlie, we start with you. Final score prediction, Texans, Cowboys.
Boy, it doesn't feel like you should be given 7 points with the Texans on the road against anybody. However, the biggest joke team they played on the road was New England, and they trashed the Patriots. I am not riding with Cooper Kupp. 42.5. I will go Texans 27, including a second half touchdown, topping 24 points. Cowboys 16.
All right. We're pretty close, Charlie. I got it 27-17 Texans.
I have it 20-16 Texans. I do not think they cover the number. But I'd love to see, I would really love, Charlie, you hit on this. I'd love to see them go in and beat a bad team on the road like they did in Foxborough. That would be really cool to see, and maybe a good omen for them going forward. We hope that's the outcome, and that's going to be it for this episode of Texans on Tap. We hope to see you back here live on YouTube late Monday night following that game, following the Texans Cowboys. So make sure you're subscribed, click the bell for notifications so you know as soon as we're live. Come on back in and join us. Hopefully we're breaking down a Houston win. Until then, go Texans.